I knew something was wrong. Before I even reached the bend in the road, the dust behind my pickup settled too fast, the morning was too quiet, and the old gravel lane that had carried my family home for 30 years suddenly ended in a wall of black steel. A brand new gate stood across the only road into my farm, not beside it, not near it, across it. Fresh posts had been sunk into the ground, a heavy chain wrapped around the center latch. A bright white sign hung from the bars with red letters that made my hands tighten around the steering wheel. Private HOA access, no farm vehicles allowed. For a few seconds, I just sat there with a bag of feed in the bed of my truck and a sick feeling moving through my chest. Behind that gate were my horses, my barn, my tools, my house, and the only life I had left after my father passed. In front of it was a lock I had never seen before, installed by people who had no deed, no easement, no ownership, and no right to touch that road, but they had done it anyway. 3 weeks later, that same gate would be tagged by county code enforcement. A licensed surveyor would drive stakes into the dirt while a sheriff's deputy stood beside him. The HOA board would stop smiling, their contractor would be asked for permits he did not have, and the woman who ordered the whole thing, Linda Marlowe, would watch in silence as the gate she bragged about was cut loose and hauled away like scrap metal. At that moment, though, all I had was a locked road, a rising anger I refused to let control me, and one message printed at the bottom of the sign: for access approval, contact the HOA board. I was part of their HOA. My farm had been there long before their subdivision. My father had paid taxes on that land before most of those houses were even drawn on a Developer S map. That road was recorded in county records as the legal access to my property. Still, someone had decided that a farm truck, a gravel lane, and a working piece of land were too ugly to exist next to their perfect neighborhood. I took out my phone and recorded everything. The posts, the lock, the sign, the tire tracks from the contractor's truck, the fresh concrete around the base. I did not cut the chain. I did not ram the gate. I did not give Linda the explosion she was waiting for. Because if there is one thing I learned from my father, it is this: when someone crosses your line, do not start by shouting, start by proving where the line is. And if you have ever dealt with an HOA, a neighbor, or anyone who thought their opinion was stronger than your property rights, keep watching, because this gate was only the beginning. What they thought was a small power move turned into the county survey that exposed everything. My farm was never the kind of place that looked impressive from a real estate brochure. There was no white mansion at the end of the lane, no decorative fountain, no perfect lawn trimmed into patterns for people to admire from the sidewalk. It was 43 acres of working land, a weathered barn with one side patched in newer lumber, a gravel drive that turned muddy after hard rain, a small pond behind the lower pasture, and a farmhouse my father had kept standing with his own hands to other people. Maybe it looked old. To me, it looked like home. My father bought that land when I was a kid, back when the county road was still narrow and most of the surrounding property was cornfield, timber, and pasture. He was not a rich man. He worked overtime, fixed his own equipment, and saved every receipt in a metal filing cabinet that sat in the spare room. He taught me that land was not just dirt. Land was time, land was labor, land was the one thing a working person could protect if he paid his taxes. He kept his records and knew where his boundaries were. That old farm road was part of that life. It ran from the county road, along the edge of what used to be open land, and curved toward our house. Feed trucks used it, the farrier used it, the vet used it, my father used it, every day until his knees got too bad to climb in and out of the tractor. After he passed, I kept using it because it was the only legal access to the farm. There was no second driveway, no back entrance, no hidden road through the woods. That lane was how I got home, how supplies came in, and how emergency vehicles would reach the property if something ever went wrong. For years, nobody questioned it. Then the fields beside us were sold to a developer. Within 2 years, the quiet land beyond the fence became a subdivision with stone entrance signs, identical mailboxes, manicured berms, and an HOA board that seemed to believe every inch of the horizon belonged to them. At first, I tried to be neighborly. I slowed my truck near their entrance. I watered the road in dry weeks to keep dust down. I waved at people walking dogs along the shoulder, even when they looked at my muddy tires like I had personally offended them. But the complaints started anyway. The farm equipment was too loud. The hay bales looked messy. The horses smelled too strong after rain. The delivery trucks did not match the upscale image of the community. Someone complained that my barn light could be seen from their upstairs window. Someone else claimed the gravel road made the neighborhood feel unfinished. I ignored most of it because people can complain about anything when they move next to a farm and expect it to behave like a golf course. Then Linda Marlowe joined the HOA board. She had moved into one of the largest houses near the front of the subdivision, the kind with black shutters, a circular driveway, and landscaping that looked like it had never seen a weed. From the first time I noticed her, she carried herself like a person who had mistaken a board position for government authority. She did not speak to people like neighbors. She spoke like she was correcting them. Her first messages were wrapped in polite language, but the meaning underneath was clear. The HOA wanted the farm road cleaned up. The HOA wanted restrictions on heavy vehicles. The HOA wanted visual screening. The HOA wanted me to coordinate deliveries so they would not disturb residents. Every email used words like community standards and shared appearance. Even though my land was not part of their community and my road was not part of their property, I answered calmly every time. I explained that I was not a member of their HOA. I explained that my farm predated the subdivision. I explained that the road was recorded access to my property and had been maintained by my family for decades. I attached copies of tax records and old survey references when I had them handy. I thought facts would settle it. They did not. The more calmly I responded, the more aggressive Linda became. She began treating my refusal like disobedience, not disagreement. Not a property issue. Disobedience. That was when I realized this was not really about dust trucks or curb appeal. It was about control. She had decided that the farm was an eyesore, and if I would not make it disappear, she would find a way to box it in. So when I found that steel gate across my road, I was shocked, but I was not confused. It was the physical version of every email she had sent me. A locked gate saying that her preferences mattered more than my deed, and the part Linda never understood was that my father had prepared me for people like her long before she ever moved in. He had kept every document, every survey, every tax receipt, every maintenance bill, and every recorded paper connected to that land. I did not know it yet, but the answer to that gate was already sitting in a metal cabinet inside my house. Linda thought she had blocked my way home. What she really did was make me open the file drawer. The first formal email from the HOA arrived on a Tuesday evening, right after he came in from feeding the horses. I remember that because my hands were still cold from rinsing out the water troughs, and there was dust on my boots from the lower pasture. I was tired in the ordinary way a person gets tired after a full day of work on land that never really lets you clock out. I expected the message to be another complaint about dust, or maybe another request for me to move hay bales away from the subdivision side of the road instead. It was the first clear warning that Linda Marlowe had stopped pretending. This was a neighborly concern. The email had the polished tone people use when they want a threat to sound professional. It said the HOA board had reviewed ongoing complaints regarding farm traffic, gravel dust, agricultural equipment, delivery trucks, and the negative visual impact of my access road on the surrounding community. It said the board had determined that all traffic using the lane beside the subdivision entrance would now require approval. It also said that farm vehicles, trailers, livestock service providers, and commercial delivery trucks were no longer allowed to enter without prior written authorization from the HOA. I sat at my kitchen table and read it twice then. I read it again because the arrogance of it almost did not feel real. This was not a road they had built. This was not a lane inside their subdivision. This was not a shared amenity, not a private HOA driveway, and not a decorative path for their residents. It was the legal access road to my farm. My father had used it long before the first subdivision lot was sold. Feed trucks had used it, veterinarians had used it, farriers had used it. Propane trucks had used it, and emergency services would have to use it if something serious ever happened on the property. The HOA was not asking me to be considerate. They were trying to make my access to my own land subject to their permission. I answered carefully. I did not write with anger, even though I felt plenty of it. I explained that my farm was not part of their HOA. I explained that their bylaws did not apply to my land. I reminded them that the access road was tied to my parcel through recorded property documents. I included the parcel number, the tax record reference, and the old plat information I had nearby. I kept the message short, clear, and documented. Because by then I had started to understand that every word might matter later, I thought a written correction might make them pause. It did not. The next morning I saw a white contractor S-truck parked near the entrance of the lane. At first I told myself it might be landscaping work for the subdivision sign. They were always trimming hedges, replacing mulch, or adjusting something around that stone entrance, like it was the front door of a hotel. But by mid-morning, I noticed two workers carrying metal posts toward the narrow stretch where my gravel road passed between the old fence line and the drainage ditch. That was when my stomach tightened. I drove down slowly and stopped far enough away that nobody could accuse me of interfering. I took out my phone and began recording. The workers had already marked spots in the ground. A small pile of concrete mix sat near the shoulder. Long black steel pieces were lying flat beside the road. It did not take a lawyer to see what they were building. They were installing a gate. Not a decorative gate beside the subdivision. Not a gate on their entrance. A gate across the road I used to reach my farm. I asked the workers who had ordered the job, and their answer pointed back to the HOA. I asked whether they had a survey showing the gate belonged there, and they only referred to the work order. I asked whether they had a permit, and they did not show one. I stopped asking after that, because I knew those men were not the source of the problem. They were there to do a job, and arguing with them would only give Linda the kind of scene she could twist later. So I documented instead. I recorded the truck, I recorded the materials, I recorded the exact location. I recorded the workers setting the posts into the ground. I made sure my phone captured the old fence line, the gravel lane, the drainage ditch, and the direction of my house beyond the bend. Then I went back to my kitchen and saved everything in a folder. By sunset, the posts were set. By the next morning, the gate was hanging. It was black steel, heavy enough to look official, with a chain wrapped through the center and a commercial-grade lock hanging from the latch. A white sign had been bolted to the bars. It stated that the road was controlled HOA access and that farm vehicles were not permitted without approval. At the bottom was a phone number for the HOA board. The sign bothered me more than the lock. A lock can be cut. A sign is a claim. It was Linda's way of putting a false story into the physical world. If enough people drove by and saw that sign, they might believe the HOA had always controlled that road. If I asked permission even once, Linda could use that as proof that I had accepted their authority. If I ignored it and forced my way through, she could claim I had destroyed HOA property. The gate was not just a barrier, it was a trap designed to make every option look bad. For one day, I worked around it. Parked near the gate and walked the long way in through a low pasture trail that was never meant for regular access. That route was muddy, uneven, and barely usable even on a good day. It was fine for checking fence on foot, but it was not a road. I could not bring in feed that way. I could not bring in hay. I could not bring in a livestock trailer, a propane truck, a vet truck, or a fire engine. I carried what I could by hand and told myself that the paperwork would sort it out soon. Then the real emergency happened. One of my older mares came up lame in the back pasture. She was a steady animal, not one to make trouble or show pain unless something was truly wrong. I had owned her long enough to know her habits when she stood away from the others, holding one leg stiff and shifting her weight like every step cost her. I knew it could not wait. I called the veterinary clinic and explained that I needed someone out as soon as possible. The farm vet knew the property. He had driven that road more times than I could count while I was giving directions. I looked toward the lane and remembered the gate. That was the first moment when the situation stopped being merely insulting and became dangerous. I drove to the entrance to meet the vet. The lock was still there. The sign was still there. The road to my own house, my own animals, and my own barn was still blocked by a private organization I had never joined. I called the number on the sign. Nobody answered. I texted the number and documented the time. The vet was on the county road with equipment in his truck, waiting to get in, while I stood on the other side of a gate I had not authorized. When a response finally came, it was not concern about an injured animal. It was not an apology. It was not even a question about whether emergency access was needed. It was a reminder that all farm-related traffic required HOA review. That was the closest I came to losing my temper. I looked at the lock and thought about bolters. I thought about my mare standing in pain. I thought about my father, who would have been furious at the sight of strangers blocking the road he had maintained for decades. I thought about every hour I had spent trying to be polite while Linda treated restraint as weakness. But I also knew exactly what she wanted. She wanted a photograph of me angry. She wanted video of me breaking a lock. She wanted to turn her illegal gate into a story about an unstable farmer destroying community property. She wanted the sheriff to arrive and see me holding the tool, not her holding the false claim. So I did the harder thing. I waited, I recorded. I called the sheriff's non-emergency line and reported that access to my farm had been blocked by a locked gate installed by the neighboring HOA. Linda must have called too, because she arrived before the deputy finished checking the scene. She came in a clean SUV, stepped out with a folder under her arm, and stood near the gate as if it were the entrance to her own estate. She looked calm in the way people look when they believe the costume of authority is the same thing as authority itself. She had printed HOA pages, complaint summaries, photographs of dust near the road, and what looked like a subdivision map. I had my deed references, tax records, photographs, video, the veterinary call log, and the simple fact that my farm sat behind the gate. The deputy listened to both sides, and I could see the difference in what we had brought. Linda had rules written for HOA members. I was not one. She had complaints from residents. Complaints do not create ownership. She had a map from the subdivision materials. A marketing map is not a recorded survey. She had the confidence of a person who had not expected anyone to challenge the foundation beneath her claim. I had older records, and older records are not always pretty, but they have. Wait, the deputy did not make a final ruling on the property line that day. That was not his role on the side of a gravel road. He made it clear that the county would need to review the records and that nobody should escalate the situation while ownership and access were being verified. With him present, the vet was finally allowed through. The delay had already happened, and the damage to my trust could not be undone, but at least my mare was treated. She recovered, but that did not make the gate harmless. A delay in veterinary care is not an inconvenience. A blocked road on a rural property is not a decoration. A locked barrier across the only usable entrance is a risk, especially when animals, fuel, tools, equipment, and human lives may depend on access. If an ambulance had needed to reach my house, it would have met the same lock. If a fire truck had needed to reach the barn, it would have met the same sign. Linda had treated a working farm like a landscaping problem, and in doing so, she had created a safety issue she clearly did not understand that evening. I walked the road slowly. After the vet left, the sun had dropped low behind the pasture, and the gate threw a long black shadow over the gravel. I noticed tire marks where the contractor had backed in. I noticed fresh concrete spilled near one post. I noticed that the gate did not line up with the subdivision entrance as neatly as Linda probably imagined. It sat awkwardly across the lane, like something forced into a place where it had never belonged. I took more photos. Then I went inside and began building a file. The email went in first, then the photographs from the installation, then the video, then the pictures of the finished gate, then the text messages about HOA approval, then the vet invoice, then the sheriff incident number, then the notes I wrote. While everything was fresh in my mind, I wrote down times, names, weather conditions, vehicle descriptions, and exactly how long access had been delayed. I did not rely on memory, because memory can be challenged. Documents are harder to shake. Linda probably believed the sheriff visit had scared me in a way. It did. It scared me into being more careful than I had ever been. Until that day, I had thought of the HOA as annoying. After that day, I understood that Linda was willing to use the appearance of power to interfere with a property she did not own. She was willing to risk an animal's health, disrupt a farm operation, and bring law enforcement into a dispute she had created. That meant I could not treat the matter like a misunderstanding anymore. I had to treat it like a paper fight, and paper fights are won by the person who keeps the better record. Before I went to bed, I opened the spot where my father's old filing cabinet still sat against the wall. I had walked past that cabinet for years without thinking much about it. It was dented, heavy and stubborn just like him. He had kept everything in it, even records I once thought were unnecessary tax bills from years ago. Receipts for gravel loads, old survey notes, letters from the county, copies of deeds, documents from before the subdivision existed. For the first time since his funeral, I felt like he had left me more than land. He had left me a defense. I pulled the top drawer open and began reading folder labels under the yellow light of the spare room. Deed, taxes, road, survey, county, easement. That last word stopped me. Easement. I did not know yet exactly how powerful that folder would become. I did not know it would lead to certified county records, a licensed survey, a demand letter, a code enforcement file, and the removal of the gate. Linda thought would make me ask permission to go home. But I knew one thing as I stood there with dust on my boots and anger finally turning into focus. The fight had changed. Linda had built a gate now. I was going to find the line, and for anyone watching who has ever had an HOA, a neighbor, or a board member act like their opinion outranks your property rights, this is the moment to remember. Do not give them the outburst they are waiting for. Save the emails, record the dates, keep the invoices, get the documents. Sometimes the most powerful response is not a raised voice. Sometimes it is opening the right drawer. The morning after the sheriff came out, I woke up before daylight and lay still for a few minutes, listening to the house settle around me. That old farmhouse had its own language. The furnace clicked before it started. The floorboards shifted when the temperature changed. Somewhere outside, one of the horses bumped a gate, and the sound carried through the cold morning air. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then I remembered the black steel gate across my road. I did not get dressed and drive straight down there. I did not go looking for Linda. I did not call the HOA number again. I did not write an angry post for the subdivision page, even though I knew a few residents would have enjoyed watching the argument unfold in public. That would have felt good for about 10 minutes, and then it would have become one more thing Linda could use to make me look unstable. So I made coffee, cleared the kitchen table, and carried my father's old metal filing cabinet folders into the light. That cabinet had sat in the spare room for years. It was gray, dented, stubborn, and heavy enough that moving it required two people and patience. When I was younger, I used to tease my father about keeping every scrap of paper. He saved gravel invoices, tax receipts, old county letters, handwritten notes from surveyors, equipment repair bills, and copies of documents that looked too plain to matter. That morning I understood him better than I ever had. The first folder I opened was marked deed. The second was marked taxes, then road maintenance, then survey, then county, then easement. That last word stopped me. I had heard my father use it before, but in the casual way landowners talk about things they assume everyone respects. The right to pass, the legal access, the recorded route. It had always been part of the farm's background, like the barn roof or the old oak near the pond. I knew the road was ours to use, but I had never had a reason to study every page. Linda had given me that reason. I spread the documents across the table and began arranging them by date. I did not rely on what I thought I remembered. I wanted a timeline. I wanted proof that could stand on its own if I handed it to an attorney, a county inspector, or a judge. I wrote down the parcel number, the deed book reference, the tax map number, and every mention of access from the public road to the farm. The language was not dramatic. Legal documents rarely are. It was plain, dry, and powerful because it had been recorded long before Linda ever moved into her large house near the subdivision entrance. The road was not a favor. It was not a courtesy. It was not a path I used only because the neighbors allowed it. It was tied to the land. That changed the way I looked at the gate. Until then, the gate had felt like an insult. Now it looked like evidence. I scanned each page. I photographed each page. I saved copies on my laptop, on an external drive, and in cloud storage. Then, I created one folder and named it Gate Evidence. Inside it, I made subfolders by category: documents, photographs, video, emails, sheriff, vet, permits, and damages. That may sound excessive, but when property rights are involved, organization is not a small detail. Confusion helps the person who caused the problem. Clarity helps the person with the truth. I downloaded the dashcam video that showed the gate blocking the lane. I saved the video I had taken while the contractor was setting posts. I saved photographs of the lock, the sign, the fresh concrete, the tire marks, and the awkward way the gate sat across the gravel road. I saved the HOA email where Linda claimed the board could restrict farm vehicles. I saved my own response explaining that I was not part of the HOA. I saved the text message showing that the vet had been delayed because acts required HOA review. Then I wrote a clean summary of events. Not emotional, not dramatic, just dates and facts. The date the email arrived, the date the contractor appeared, the time the gate was completed, the time I called the vet, the time I contacted the HOA number, the time the sheriff was called, the time the vet finally got through, the condition of my mare, the delay caused by the locked gate, the incident number from the sheriff's office. I knew I was angry, and that was exactly why I wrote everything down while the details were fresh. Anger fades, memory changes, documents remain. The next step was the county clerk's office. I drove there mid-morning, taking the long way because the normal road was still blocked. The building was familiar in the way county buildings often are. Brick walls, old floors, fluorescent lights, and people behind counters who have seen every kind of neighbor dispute imaginable. I brought my folder, my parcel number, and copies of the records my father had kept. I did not ask the clerk to take my side. I did not ask for legal advice. I asked for official records. That distinction mattered. The clerk helped pull the recorded deed history, the plat maps, and the subdivision documents filed when the land beside my farm had been developed. The more we looked, the clearer the picture became. My farm was separate. My access route existed before the HOA. The subdivision had been designed around the existing farm road, not over it. There were references showing that the developer knew the access existed when the residential lots were created. That was the first real crack in Linda S.'s story. She had acted as if the road became HOA territory because the subdivision grew around it. The county records showed the opposite. The subdivision was the newcomer. The farm access was already there. I paid for certified copies. That was not cheap, but it was worth every dollar. A screenshot can be dismissed. A regular printout can be questioned. So certified county copy has a different weight. It tells the next person reading it that the record is not something I typed at home to win an argument. It came from the public file. After the county clerk, I checked permits. I searched for anything connected to the gate, the posts, the roadside obstruction, the access control structure, or work performed near that lane. I looked under the HOA name, the management company name, and the contractor's name. Once I had it from the work truck, I found nothing useful for Linda. No permit for the gate, no county approval to obstruct the access road, no fire access review, no right-of-way authorization, no setback clearance. No sign that anybody had asked the most basic question before installing a locked barrier across the only usable road into a working farm. That was when the problem became bigger than a property disagreement. A locked gate on a rural access road is not just an inconvenience. It can affect medical response, fire response, animal care, deliveries, fuel access, and basic use of the property. Linda had treated it like a neighborhood appearance issue. The records were starting to show it was a safety and legal issue. I called a real estate attorney that afternoon. I chose someone who handled boundary disputes, easements, and rural land issues. I did not call asking how to ruin Linda's life. I called asking how to protect my farm without making the kind of mistake that could weaken my case. That is important, especially for anyone listening who has ever been pushed too far by a neighbor or HOA. The goal is not to feel powerful for one afternoon. The goal is to stay right all the way to the end. The attorney's advice was calm and direct. Do not cut the lock unless there is an immediate emergency that leaves no reasonable alternative. Do not threaten Linda. Do not get into verbal fights at the gate. Keep everything in writing. Send no emotional emails. Save every cost connected to the obstruction. Hire an independent licensed surveyor. Let the documents and the land speak before making a formal demand. So that was exactly what I did. I called a licensed surveyor who had experience with older rural parcels and recorded easements. I explained that the neighboring HOA had installed a gate across my only access road and was claiming control over it. I told him I needed the property line marked, the easement located, and the gate position documented. He warned me that older descriptions can take careful work, especially when land has been divided and developed over time. Then he said something I wrote down afterward because it stayed with me. Old records usually tell the truth when someone takes the time to read them properly. While waiting for the survey, I kept documenting the gate every day. I took a photograph each morning from the same angle. I took another each evening. I recorded whether the lock was still in place. I logged any delivery that had to be delayed or rerouted. I saved receipts for extra feed runs because I could not bring larger loads through properly. I noted the time lost walking supplies around the obstruction. I added the veterinary bill and the clinic's note about delayed access. I also checked the alternate path through the pasture more carefully. It was not a true access road in dry weather. A pickup might crawl through part of it if the driver knew the ground. In wet weather, it turned soft quickly. Fire engine could not use it. An ambulance would not risk it. A livestock trailer could jackknife near the low spot by the fence. That mattered. Because Linda's gate did not merely make my life harder, it eliminated the only practical entrance. As the days passed, Linda's silence became its own kind of message. She did not apologize. The HOA did not remove the sign. Nobody from the board asked for my records. The gate stayed locked as if they were waiting for me to give up or explode. I did neither. I printed the file index and kept adding to it. By the time the surveyor arrived, I had a binder thick enough to make the issue clear in minutes. The front page had a timeline. Behind that were certified county records, photographs, emails, screenshots, invoices, and incident notes. I made one copy for my attorney and one for myself. The surveyor came on a gray Thursday morning. The sky was low, and the road still had damp spots from rain earlier in the week. He set up his equipment near the county road, checked the recorded documents, and began working his way along the lane. I stayed back and let him do his job. I did not want to influence anything. I wanted the truth, even if it was less perfect than I hoped. He found old reference points. He compared them against the modern plat. He checked the curve of the access road, the drainage ditch, the old fence line, and the subdivision boundary. He placed flags as he worked, bright against the dull grass and gravel. When he reached the gate, he slowed down. That was the first thing I noticed. He checked the measurement. Then he checked again. Then he moved around the posts and looked back toward the road, the old fence, and the survey line he had been following. He did not make a big announcement. Surveyors do not usually behave like television lawyers. He simply continued working, placing flags with a kind of quiet certainty that made my pulse pick up. The flags ran past the gate, not near it, past it. One line showed the boundary clearly enough that even a person with no survey experience could understand the problem. The posts were not on HOA common area. They were not on some vague shared strip of land. They were inside my property line, crossing the recorded farm access. Linda had not just blocked my road, she had installed a structure on my land. For a while, I just stood there and looked at the flags. I thought about my father saving papers in that old cabinet. I thought about Linda's sign, claiming HOA control. I thought about the vet waiting at the road, while my mare stood in pain. I thought about how close I had come to cutting the lock and giving Linda the story she wanted. Then I took out my phone and recorded the survey flags beside the gate. Not because I needed to celebrate, because I needed the record. That evening, I sent the surveyor's preliminary findings, the photos, the permit search results, and the certified county records to my attorney. The final report would take a little more time, but the truth was already visible in the ground. The gate stood where it should never have been. The documents matched the land. The land matched the access rights. And Linda's entire claim was beginning to collapse under the weight of facts she had never bothered to check. If you are watching this and you have ever been treated like your patience means permission, remember this part. Staying calm is not the same as backing down. Sometimes staying calm is how you make sure every step you take is solid. Save the email, get the record, hire the surveyor, ask the county. Do the boring work that people like Linda hope you will never do, because the boring work is often where the ending begins. And when I looked at those bright flags running through the morning grass beside that black steel gate, I knew the fight had changed again. Linda had built her case on confidence. I was building mine on proof. When the final survey report arrived, I set it on the kitchen table and looked at it for a long moment before opening it. I had already seen the flags in the ground. I had already watched the surveyor slow down at the gate, check his measurements, and place bright markers that told a very different story from the one Linda had been telling everyone. But a flag in the dirt is one thing. A signed survey report from a licensed professional is another. That report turned a dispute into a record. The first pages were dry and technical, full of legal descriptions, parcel references, measurements, bearings, and notes about older boundary markers. For most people, it would have looked like a stack of paperwork meant to confuse the average homeowner. For me, it was the clearest thing I had seen since the gate went up. The boundary line was marked. The access route was identified. The gate location was documented with photographs and coordinates. The report did not leave much room for interpretation. The gate was on my land. Not near my land, not possibly touching my land, not in a shared strip or a gray area where both sides could claim misunderstanding. The steel posts had been placed inside my property boundary, and the locked gate crossed the recorded farm access that served as the only practical route from the county road to my house, barn, animals, and working fields. I read that part several times because it changed the balance of the entire situation. Until then, Linda had been acting as if I needed to prove why I should be allowed. Through the survey reversed that completely. Now the question was not whether I had permission to use the road. The question was why the HOA had installed a locked structure on private land it did not own. Then, I found the second problem. The side fencing that had been attached to make the gate look more permanent also crossed onto my parcel. It was not a large section, but that almost made it more revealing. People who try to take control of someone else's property often do not begin with a courthouse filing or a bulldozer. They begin with a few feet. A post goes in, a sign appears, a strip of land gets treated as if it belongs to someone else. Then, after enough time passes, they act as if the new arrangement has always been normal. That was what Linda had tried to do. She had not just blocked a road, she had tried to create a new reality on the ground. If I had accepted the gate, asked for access, or treated the HOA number on that sign as legitimate, she could have used my cooperation as proof that the board had authority. If I had cut the lock in anger, she could have used my reaction as proof that I was reckless. The gate was designed to leave me with bad choices. The survey gave me the first clean choice I had been offered since the whole thing started. I sent the report to my attorney that same afternoon. He reviewed the survey, the certified county records, the deed references, the easement language, the permit search, the photographs, the emails, the sheriff incident number, and the veterinary delay documentation. Then he prepared a formal demand letter to the HOA, their management company, and their insurance carrier. The letter was not emotional. That was one reason it was effective. It did not try to out-insult Linda. It did not call her names. It did not describe her attitude. It did not talk about how angry I had been standing beside that locked gate while my vet waited on the other side. It simply laid out the facts in a way that could not easily be waved aside. My farm was a separate parcel. The recorded access existed before the subdivision. The HOA had no jurisdiction over my property. The gate and fencing had been installed without my consent. The locked barrier interfered with ingress and egress. The obstruction disrupted farm operations, delayed veterinary care, created emergency access concerns, and trespassed across a surveyed property line. No permit appeared in county records. No fire access review had been located. No documented legal authority supported the HOA's claim. The demand was direct. Remove the gate. Restore the disturbed ground. Stop interfering with access. Reimburse the survey cost, legal expenses, documented losses, and additional costs caused by the obstruction. Preserve all records connected to the decision to approve. Fund, order, or install the gate. That last part mattered. Preserving records means people cannot quietly delete emails, alter minutes, or pretend nobody remembers who authorized what. Once that letter went out, the issue was no longer a neighbor complaining about a gate. It was a formal legal dispute with documents attached. For the first time since the whole thing began, Linda stopped contacting me directly. That silence felt different from victory. It felt like the moment before a storm shifts direction. The HOA had been confident when they thought this was a matter of board authority. They became much less confident when the question turned into land ownership, trespass, insurance coverage, unpermitted work, and recorded easement rights. The management company responded first. Their tone was careful. They wanted copies of the survey. They wanted the county records. They wanted the permit search results. They wanted the incident number from the sheriff's office. They wanted the veterinary invoice and the timeline. I sent everything through my attorney. That was another important lesson. Once a matter becomes serious, do not keep having emotional side conversations. Do not let the person who caused the problem pull you into a phone call where the story can be twisted later. Keep the record clean. Let each message pass through the proper channel. That may feel slow, but slow and documented is better than fast and messy. Behind the scenes, the HOA started asking its own questions. A resident who was unhappy with the board's handling of the matter later told me that the emergency emails had started almost immediately after the demand letter arrived. The board wanted to know whether Linda had received a proper vote before hiring the contractor. They wanted to know whether the HOA attorney had reviewed the road issue before the gate was installed. They wanted to know whether the contractor had verified the property line. They wanted to know why HOA funds had been used for a structure that now appeared to be sitting on land outside the community. The answers were not good for Linda. There had not been a proper legal review. There had not been a survey. There had not been a permit. There had not been a clear board authorization that matched the scope of what was built. The contractor had relied on the HOA representation that the work area belonged to the association. The HOA had relied on Linda's certainty. Linda had relied on her own assumption that confidence would be enough. Confidence was no longer enough. The strongest piece of the legal twist came from the old subdivision records at the county clerk's office. Buried in the development documents was a reference to the existing farm access. It showed that when the land beside my farm was divided for residential use, the access route was already known. The developer had not created the neighborhood in ignorance. The development had been planned around the road. That detail removed one of the HOA's easiest excuses. They could not honestly claim that the farm road was a surprise. They could not say the access only appeared after the houses were built. They could not argue that the road had somehow become theirs merely because their subdivision was newer, larger, and more expensive looking than my old farm. The records showed the truth clearly. My access was older than their complaint. Linda tried to frame it differently during the next HOA meeting. I did not attend because my attorney advised me to avoid turning the meeting into a public confrontation. But several residents who were tired of the board's behavior shared what happened afterward. Linda described the situation as an unfortunate conflict between rural use and community standards. She suggested the board had acted to protect appearance, safety, and property values. She treated the county documents as if they were outdated technical paperwork being used against the neighborhood. That was her mistake. A deed is not a technicality. A recorded easement is not a courtesy. A surveyed boundary is not a personal opinion. Those are the basic tools that keep one person's land from becoming another person's convenience. The HOA's insurance carrier understood that better than Linda did. Once the insurance company reviewed the demand letter, the survey, and the lack of permit records, the conversation changed from defending the gate to limiting the damage. Insurance companies do not enjoy emotional neighborhood drama. They look at risk. And the risk was obvious. A board member had caused a structure to be installed on private land, across a recorded access road, without proper verification, and the obstruction had already created documented damages. The contractor's invoice created another problem. The work had been described as an access control improvement for the HOA. That phrase made the situation worse because it showed the purpose of the gate was not decorative. It was intended to control access, but the access being controlled was mine. When the contractor was asked for the survey or written proof that the HOA owned the installation area, he could not produce it. When asked who told him where to put the gate, the trail led back to Linda. One by one, the supports under her story fell away. The HOA bylaws did not apply to my farm. The subdivision brochure did not override county records. Complaints about dust did not create property rights. Community appearance standards did not erase a recorded access route. A board member's confidence did not turn private land into common area. A contractor's invoice did not become a permit. A lock did not become ownership. That was the true legal reversal. Linda had started by making me look like the outsider who needed approval. The evidence showed that she was the one who had crossed onto land outside her authority. By the end of that week, my attorney sent the complete package to the county. The file included the survey report, certified deeds, the recorded access language, photographs of the gate and side fencing, screenshots of the HOA's messages, the permit search results, the sheriff incident number, and the documentation of the veterinary delay. Code enforcement scheduled a site visit. The sheriff's office had already documented the earlier conflict. The county inspector wanted to review the obstruction in person. That was when the emotional pressure finally lifted from my shoulders. Not because the fight was over, it was not. The gate was still there. Linda had not apologized. The HOA had not yet paid $1. But the argument had moved out of the world of opinions and into the world of records. Linda could still complain. She could still act offended. She could still tell her neighbors. I was difficult, but she could no longer make the central fact disappear. The gate was on my land. If you are watching this because you have your own HOA problem, your own neighbor dispute, or your own property line headache, remember this part. The turning point is rarely the loudest moment. It is often the quiet moment when the paperwork lines up. The email matches the photograph, the survey matches the deed, the county record matches the history, and suddenly the person who seemed powerful has nothing left but an attitude. Linda had a gate, a sign, and a folder full of HOA complaints. I had the deed, the easement, the county records, the survey, the permit search, the sheriff report, the vet invoice, and the truth sitting in black ink. For weeks she had acted like I needed permission to go home. Now the county was about to ask her why she had built a locked gate on property that was never hers. But the county site visit was scheduled for a Thursday morning, and I remember how quiet the farm felt before everyone arrived. The air was cold enough that I could see my breath when I stepped outside, and a thin layer of frost still clung to the grass along the fence line. The horses were calm. The barn was still. The gravel road looked ordinary except for the black steel gate standing across it like an accusation. By that point, I no longer saw the gate as just an obstacle. I saw it as evidence. Every post, every bolt, every scrape of fresh concrete around the base told the same story. The HOA had acted first and checked later. Linda had treated confidence as ownership. The contractor had treated a work order as permission. And now, the people who actually dealt in permits, property lines, and enforcement were coming to look at the thing Linda had been so proud of. I had my binder ready before the first county truck pulled in. Not because I planned to argue, but because I had learned something important by then. When officials arrive, the clearest person in the room is not the one with the strongest emotions. It is the one who can hand over a clean timeline, certified records, photographs, and the right names in the right order. The county inspector arrived first. Then came the code enforcement officer. A sheriff deputy pulled in a few minutes later and parked near the shoulder, not blocking anyone, just present enough to make it clear that this was not a casual neighborhood complaint anymore. My surveyor arrived with his equipment and a copy of his report. The HOA management representative came in a polished SUV that looked strangely uncomfortable on the gravel. The contractor arrived in his work truck. Much less relaxed than he had looked on the day the gate went in. Linda arrived last. She stepped out with a folder under her arm, dressed neatly, carrying herself with that same boardroom confidence she had used from the beginning. But this time the setting did not favor her. There was no conference table, no residents seated in rows, no HOA agenda, no polite language about community standards. There was only the road, the land, the survey stakes, and a locked gate sitting where the document said it should never have been. The inspector began by asking for the basic facts. I let my attorney's written packet do most of the talking. He walked the group through the marked points, the old reference markers, the recorded access route, and the exact placement of the gate posts. He did it in the calm, careful way professionals do when they know. The measurements are stronger than any opinion in the group. That was when the mood changed. The flags were still there, bright against the dull grass. They showed the property line running past the gate in a way that was not hard to understand. Even someone with no background in surveying could see the problem. The gate was not on HOA common area. It was not on subdivision property. It was not in some uncertain strip where two maps disagreed. It was inside my property boundary, crossing the access route recorded for the farm. Linda did not interrupt. That was the first time I had seen her quiet. The inspector moved from the flags to the gate itself. He looked at the posts, the hinges, the lock, the sign, and the concrete. Then he reviewed the permit record. There was no approved permit for the structure, no county approval for a locked barrier across that access, no fire access review, no documentation showing that anyone had permission to obstruct the only practical road into a rural property with livestock, equipment, fuel, and a residence beyond it. Code enforcement took photographs from several angles. The officer documented the lock, the sign, the placement of the posts, and the way the gate prevented normal vehicle access. This part mattered, because the issue was no longer just about whether Linda had annoyed me. The county was now documenting whether the HOA had created a physical obstruction with legal and safety consequences. The sheriff's deputy reviewed the earlier incident notes. He already knew about the day the vet was delayed. He knew there had been a dispute over access, but now the survey and county records gave that earlier call a different meaning. It was no longer a confusing argument between neighbors. It was a documented case of an organization interfering with access on land it did not own. The contractor tried to explain his position without taking full responsibility. He had been hired by the HOA. He had been told where to place the gate. He had not personally researched the deed, the easement, or the subdivision records. But the inspector was not interested in excuses. A contractor installing a permanent structure near a property line is expected to verify the basics. A work order does not replace a permit. A board member's confidence does not replace a survey. I could see the concern settle over him as that became clear. Linda's management representative looked even more uncomfortable. The representative asked a few careful questions. The kind people ask when they already know the answer may be expensive. The surveyor answered each one by pointing back to the report. The inspector pointed back to the permit file. Code enforcement pointed back to the physical obstruction. Nobody needed to raise a voice. That was the most satisfying part after weeks of Linda acting as if volume, position, and polish could bend reality. The truth arrived quietly and stood there without moving. The violation notice was issued on site. The HOA was ordered to remove the gate within a set deadline. Restore the disturbed ground, remove the attached fencing from my parcel, and stop interfering with the recorded access. The county also noted the emergency access concern, which placed the situation in a more serious category than a simple neighbor disagreement. A locked obstruction across the only usable entrance to a property can create real consequences if emergency services are delayed. That point seemed to land harder than Linda expected. It was one thing for her to dismiss my inconvenience. It was harder to dismiss the idea that an ambulance, fire truck, or sheriff's vehicle could be blocked by a lock. The HOA had no right to install. The vet delay had already created a documented example. The county did not have to imagine what might happen. They had a real incident in the file. For the first time, Linda looked less like a person defending a decision and more like a person realizing the decision had grown beyond her control. The sheriff's deputy made the situation plain in his own way. Once the HOA had official notice that the gate was on private land and obstructing recorded access, any continued locking, replacing, or interference could create further legal problems. He did not need to be dramatic. The meaning was clear enough. Linda could no longer hide behind confusion. The contractor was instructed not to perform additional work there unless proper authorization and permits were in place. The HOA management representative was told to coordinate removal and restoration. My attorney was notified of the county's findings. The paper trail became official, and Linda, the woman who had once treated my deed like an inconvenience, stood beside her folder and said almost nothing. A few days later, the HOA held an emergency meeting. I did not go in looking for a confrontation. In fact, I avoided speaking more than necessary. By then, the record had spoken for me. But residents had started asking questions, and those questions were no longer about dust or trucks. They were about money, liability, and authority. People wanted to know why HOA funds had been used to build an illegal gate. They wanted to know why no survey had been ordered. They wanted to know why no attorney had reviewed the recorded access before the work began. They wanted to know whether their dues would be used to pay for my survey, my attorney's fees, road repairs, or a settlement. They wanted to know why one board member's campaign against a farm road had turned into a county enforcement file. That was where Linda lost the room. For months, she'd framed the farm as the problem. The dust was the problem. The trucks were the problem. The old barn was the problem. The rural access was the problem. But now the residents were seeing a different picture. The problem was not the farm that had been there all along. The problem was an HOA board member who had tried to control land outside the HOA and left everyone else exposed to the cost. The management company recommended immediate compliance with the county order. The HOA's insurance carrier pushed for damage control. Their attorney advised them not to interfere with my access again. That combination ended the argument more effectively than any speech I could have given. Linda still tried to soften what happened. She described it as a misunderstanding, a breakdown in communication, a good faith effort to protect the community, but the documents did not support that version. A misunderstanding might explain one email. It does not explain a locked gate, no permit, no survey, no authority, and a recorded access route ignored in public county records. By the end of that meeting, the board voted to comply with the county order and begin reviewing Linda's actions. The contractor was contacted about removal. The management company requested all communications related to the gate. Residents asked for financial transparency. Linda's authority, which had once seemed so solid from the outside, began to collapse under the weight of simple questions. And that is the part I hope people remember. The turning point was not rage. It was not revenge. It was not a dramatic confrontation at the gate. The turning point was when the matter left Linda's version of events and entered the official record. County inspector, code enforcement, sheriff's deputy, licensed surveyor, certified documents. Once those people and papers were involved, the HOA could no longer manage the story with attitude. The next morning, I drove down to the gate. Again, it was still standing, but it felt different before the county visit. It had felt like a threat after the violation notice. It felt like something already defeated, just waiting for someone to haul it away. I took one more photograph for the file. Then I turned back toward the barn because the animals still needed feeding. The fence still needed checking, and the farm still had to run. That is the thing people like Linda never understand about working land. You can create drama around it. You can complain about it. You can try to dress it up or fence it off, but the work continues. The land does not care about HOA politics. It only asks whether you show up and take care of it. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. The county had put in writing what my father's records had been saying all along. The road was my access. The gate was illegal. And Linda's authority ended at the property line. She should have checked before she ever ordered a contractor to dig. The gate came down 8 days after the county issued the violation notice. I stood near the fence line that morning with my hands in my jacket pockets, watching the same contractor who had installed it unbolt the hinges under the eyes of the county inspector. There was no dramatic speech, no shouting, no apology from Linda. Just the sound of metal scraping against gravel in a gate that had never belonged there being lowered onto a trailer. For the first time in weeks, the road was open. The HOA had to pay for the removal, the road repair, and the restoration of the disturbed ground around the posts. Their insurance carrier eventually pushed them towards settlement, instead of letting the dispute grow into a larger lawsuit. They reimbursed my survey costs, part of my attorney's fees, the extra veterinary charges, and the documented losses from delayed deliveries and disrupted farm work. It was not a lottery ticket. It was not revenge money. It was accountability. The contractor did not walk away clean either. A complaint was filed over the unpermitted work and his failure to verify the property line before installing a locked structure. He tried to say he had only followed the HOA's instructions, but the county made it clear that following bad instructions does not erase professional responsibility. As for Linda, the damage to her reputation happened in the one place she cared about most, the HOA meeting room. Residents who had once trusted her started asking harder questions. Why had she spent HOA money without proper approval? Why had she ignored recorded property documents? Why had she risked everyone's dues over a road the community did not own? By the end of the emergency meeting, she was removed from her committee role. And not long after that, she resigned from the board entirely. The HOA also had to rewrite its procedures. No more construction near property lines without a survey. No more access restrictions without attorney review. No more using community standards as an excuse to control land outside the subdivision. Every future project near my road required written confirmation from the county. When the dust settled, I put up one small sign of my own, nothing flashy, nothing rude, just a plain metal sign near the entrance that said the farm access was private and recorded with the county. That was enough. I still drive that road every morning. The gravel still kicks up dust. The barn still needs repairs. The horses still wait at the fence when they hear my truck. The subdivision is still there on the other side, with its trimmed lawns and perfect mailboxes. But nobody from the HOA has tried to block that lane again. And that is the lesson I took from all of it. I did not win because I was louder than Linda. I did not win because I threatened her, embarrassed her, or played dirty. I won because my father kept the records. I kept my temper, and the truth was stronger than a locked gate. So if someone ever tries to tell you that your property rights disappear because they are inconvenient, do not give them the reaction they want. Get the deed, get the survey, get the emails, get the county records. Then let the facts walk into the room before you do. And if this story reminded you of an HOA, a neighbor, or a board member who crossed the line, share your thoughts in the comments. Save this video for later, and subscribe for more stories where the quiet person with the paperwork finally gets the last word.